The silence in the lawyer's office was so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, a pressure not unlike the one I'd felt just before my heart surgery. My son, Mark, sat across the polished mahogany table, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. His wife, Jessica, was beside him, preening like a cat who had just cornered a particularly plump canary. They thought this was the final act, the triumphant conclusion to their carefully laid plans. They thought they had won. They didn't know that the real ending, the one I had written, was about to begin. They had sold my house from under me while I lay helpless in a hospital bed, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. They had forgotten about Laura, and you never, ever forgot about my Laura. It had all started with a flutter, a strange, unnerving tremor in my chest that felt like a trapped bird beating its wings against my ribs. I was in the garden, trimming the rose bushes Laura had planted the first year we moved into the house. It was our sanctuary, that house. Not just bricks and mortar, but a living, breathing album of our 45 years together. Every scratch on the hardwood floor was a memory, every faded patch on the wallpaper a story. The scent of her lavender soap still lingered in the upstairs bathroom, a ghostly perfume that was my comfort and my torment. After she was gone, the house became my anchor. The silence was deafening at first, a void where her laughter used to be. But slowly, I learned to live with it. I filled the quiet with the hum of the television, the clatter of my tools in the workshop, the simple routines that kept the crushing weight of grief at bay. I would talk to her sometimes. I'd stand in the kitchen and say, "Well, Laura, I think I'll make that chili you like tonight." And for a moment, I could almost hear her reply, a gentle chiding about using too much cumin. Mark was our only child. He'd always been different, driven, ambitious, with a focus on the material world that Laura and I never quite understood. We'd raised him to be a good man, to value kindness and integrity, but somewhere along the way, the shiny allure of money and status had become his true north. He married Jessica, a woman who seemed to be cast from the same mold, her eyes always calculating, her compliments always feeling like assessments. They lived in the city, in a sleek, sterile condominium that felt more like a hotel lobby than a home. They visited on holidays, their presence filling my quiet house with a restless, anxious energy. They would walk through the rooms, their gazes lingering on the old furniture, the worn carpets. "Dad, this place is just too much for you," Mark said one Thanksgiving, gesturing vaguely at the living room. "All this space, the upkeep. You should think about downsizing." Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "He's right, Tom. A nice, modern apartment. Something manageable. No stairs, no garden to worry about. We just worry about you rattling around in this big old place all by yourself." I just smiled and shook my head. "This is my home," I said, my voice firm. "Your mother loved this house. I'm not leaving." The conversation became a recurring theme, a constant, gentle pressure they applied whenever they visited. They framed it as concern for my well-being, but it felt more like a campaign. The house, I knew, was prime real estate. Our quiet suburban street was becoming trendy, old homes being torn down to make way for modern monstrosities. My property, with its large mature garden, was worth a small fortune, a fortune I had no interest in cashing in. Then came the flutter in my chest, followed by a dizzy spell that sent me staggering into the rose bushes. The thorns tore at my arms, but I barely felt it. A cold dread washed over me. I managed to get inside and call my doctor. The tests were swift and the verdict unequivocal. I had a severe blockage. I needed bypass surgery, and I needed it soon. The news hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't afraid of the surgery itself, not really. I was afraid of the vulnerability, of being helpless. I thought of Laura, how she'd held my hand through every flu, every minor ailment, her presence a shield against any fear. Now, I had to face this alone. Mark and Jessica sprang into action with an efficiency that was almost unnerving. They descended on the house, their faces etched with practiced worry. "Dad, don't you worry about a thing," Mark said, patting my shoulder a little too hard. "We'll handle everything. We just need to get some paperwork in order just in case." That's when they brought up the power of attorney. It made sense, on the surface. Someone needed to be able to pay my bills, to manage my affairs while I was incapacitated. I was a practical man. I understood the necessity. It's just temporary, Tom, Jessica cooed, laying a stack of papers on the kitchen table. It gives Mark the ability to make sure your mortgage is paid, your utilities are kept on, just until you're back on your feet. The lawyer said it's standard procedure. I remember looking at the documents. The legal jargon was a dense, impenetrable forest of words. My mind was foggy, clouded with fear about the impending operation. I was tired, so deeply tired. I saw the words, durable power of attorney, and my son's name. I trusted him. Despite his flaws, despite his relentless focus on money, he was my son. A father is supposed to trust his son. Okay, I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly. I signed where Jessica's perfectly manicured finger pointed. I signed away my control, believing it was a temporary loan, a necessary precaution. The relief on their faces should have been a warning. It was too quick, too complete. It wasn't the relief of people whose worries have been eased, it was the relief of people whose plan was falling into place. The surgery was a success, technically. I survived, but the recovery was brutal. I woke up in the ICU, feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. A thick fog of anesthesia and pain medication clung to me for days. Mark and Jessica were there, their faces floating in and out of focus. They spoke in low, soothing tones, telling me everything was fine, that I just needed to rest. They moved me from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility, a clean, sterile place that smelled of antiseptic and despair. I hated it. Every day was a monotonous cycle of physical therapy, tasteless food, and long, empty hours staring at a beige wall. All I wanted was to go home. Soon, Dad, Mark would say when I asked. You're not strong enough yet. The doctors want to keep you here for observation. It's for the best. I felt like a prisoner. A month crawled by, then another. My strength was returning, slowly. I could walk the length of the hallway without my chest screaming in protest. I was getting better, but whenever I brought up going home, Mark would have a new excuse. The house needs some modifications, Dad. We're getting a ramp installed for the front steps, making the shower a walk-in. It's a whole project. It sounded plausible, but a knot of unease was tightening in my gut. I started calling the house, just to hear the phone ring in the familiar silence, but it was always disconnected. We had to switch providers, Dad, Jessica explained smoothly when I asked. Got you a better deal. The new number just hasn't been connected yet. Technical issues. The lies were starting to stack up, each one a flimsy brick in a wall they were building around me. The final devastating blow came not with a bang, but with a casual, cruel slip of the tongue. Another patient in the rehab center, a kind old woman named Eleanor, was talking about her own house. My daughter is a real estate agent, she said. She says the market in your neighborhood is just insane. A house on Elm Street just sold for over $1 million. Can you imagine? My house was on Elm Street. Ice flooded my veins. The air in my lungs turned to stone. Which house? I asked, my voice thin and reedy. Number 214, she said, peering at me over her glasses. The one with the lovely rose garden. Do you know it? Number 214. My house. My home. Laura's garden. I didn't answer her. I turned and walked back to my room, each step an effort of will. The world had tilted on its axis. The beige walls of my room seemed to be closing in on me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the flimsy mattress sagging under my weight. It couldn't be true. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Mark and Jessica arrived for their weekly visit that afternoon. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, a sick, frantic bird once again. I let them go through their usual routine, the false smiles, the empty platitudes about my progress. Finally, I couldn't bear it any longer. I looked straight at Mark. Eleanor from down the hall tells me a house on my street just sold. I saw it. A flicker of panic in his eyes before the mask of calm snapped back into place. Jessica's smile tightened at the corners. Oh, really? Mark said, trying to sound casual. It's a hot market, like we've been saying. She said it was number 214. I continued, my voice dangerously quiet. She said it sold for over $1 million. The silence that followed was a living thing. It filled the room, suffocating, absolute. Jessica stared at her hands, refusing to meet my gaze. Mark took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before delivering a killing blow. "Dad," he began, his voice taking on a tone of patronizing reason, "we need to talk about that." And then he told me. He told me with a chilling lack of emotion, as if he were discussing a business transaction. He had sold the house. My house. He had used the power of attorney, claiming I was not of sound mind or body to manage my own affairs, and had pushed the sale through while I was recovering. "It was for your own good," he insisted, the words a venomous balm. "The house was a burden. The money will ensure you have the best care for the rest of your life. We've already found you a wonderful place, a luxury assisted living community. It's top of the line." I stared at him, my son, and I saw a stranger. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had helped with his homework, the man I had proudly watched graduate from college. He was gone. In his place was this cold, calculating creature who had just carved out my heart and was now explaining why it was for my own benefit. "My home," I whispered, the words cracking. "Laura's home." Jessica finally spoke, her voice sharp and brittle. "Tom, be realistic. It was a decaying old house full of junk. This is a fresh start. We did you a favor. The new owners are a lovely young family. They're going to modernize it." Modernize it. The word was a desecration. They would tear out Laura's garden. They would paint over the wallpaper where I'd marked Mark's height as he grew. They would erase us. Rage, cold and pure, exploded in my chest. It was a volcano of betrayal erupting through the fog of my grief and sickness. I felt a terrifying clarity. The world snapped into sharp focus. "Get out," I said. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was steel. Mark looked taken aback. "Dad, let's be rational about this. Get out." I stood up, my body trembling with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Both of you, get out of my sight. Now." They scurried out of the room, startled by the force of my anger. The door clicked shut behind them, and I collapsed back onto the bed. The rage subsided, leaving behind a hollow, desolate emptiness. They had taken everything. My past, my future, the very ground beneath my feet. I was adrift, a ghost in a beige room, with nothing left but a bank account full of money I didn't want, and a future in a luxury prison I would never accept. I lay there for hours as the sun set, casting long shadows across the floor. Despair was a physical entity, a heavy blanket smothering me. I thought about giving up. What was there to fight for? The house was gone. The memories were being bulldozed. Mark, my only family, had betrayed me in the most profound way imaginable. And then, in the deepest pit of my despair, a memory surfaced. It was a flicker at first, a ghost of a thought. It was Laura. Not the memory of her illness or her death, but Laura in her prime. Laura, sitting at our kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration, surrounded by a mountain of official-looking documents. She had always been the practical one, the planner. "Tom, you have your head in the clouds sometimes," she would say with a loving smile. "Someone has to keep our feet on the ground." She was the one who managed our finances, who made sure our wills were in order, who thought about the future in concrete terms. I remembered that day vividly now. It was about 10 years before she got sick. She had been reading an article about estate planning and probate court horror stories. It had spooked her. "We're putting the house in a trust," she had announced one evening. "A revocable living trust. It protects it. It means if something happens to one of us, the other doesn't have to go through legal hell to keep our home. It keeps it separate from the rest of our estate. It's safer." I hadn't paid much attention at the time. I trusted her implicitly. I signed where she told me to sign, just as I had recently signed for Mark. But this time, it was different. This time, it was Laura's hand guiding the pen, her foresight protecting us. We had gone to a lawyer, a serious woman with sharp eyes who had explained it all. The Thomas and Laura Miller Revocable Living Trust. We were the co-trustees. Upon the death of one, the other would become the sole trustee. The house, our primary asset, was no longer technically owned by Thomas and Laura Miller, the individuals. It was owned by the trust. A second deed. It wasn't a secret deed hidden in a wall safe. It was a public record, a deed of transfer filed with the county, moving the property from our names into the name of the trust. Mark, in his greedy haste, wouldn't have looked for it. He would have found an old property tax bill or the original deed of sale from 45 years ago in my files. He would have assumed the power of attorney I gave him, which granted him control over my personal assets, was enough. He was arrogant. He was sloppy. He didn't know that he hadn't been dealing with me, Tom Miller, the grieving old man. He had been trying to illegally sell an asset belonging to a separate legal entity, the trust. A tiny, fragile spark of hope ignited in the darkness. It was a long shot. I didn't know the legal intricacies, but it was something. It was a weapon. This was the quiet decision. Lying there in that sterile room, the scent of antiseptic burning my nostrils, I made a vow. I would not let them win. I would not let them erase Laura's memory. I would fight, not with rage and shouting, but with cunning and precision. I would use their own arrogance against them. I would play the part of the defeated old man, retreat into the shadows, and I would dismantle their victory, piece by piece. My war had just begun. The next day, I was a different man. The despair was still there, a cold stone in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a layer of icy resolve. I had a purpose. I checked myself out of the rehabilitation facility against their advice and Mark's frantic protesting phone calls. "Dad, you can't. You're not ready," he'd shouted over the phone. "I am ready to get out of this place," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You found me an apartment, didn't you? I'll go there. Send me the address." This was part of my plan. I needed to be out of their direct supervision. I needed space to think and to act. By agreeing to move into the apartment they had arranged, I was lulling them into a false sense of security. They would think I had accepted my fate. The apartment was exactly as I had imagined it, soulless, modern, and utterly devoid of character. It was in one of those sprawling complexes with identical beige buildings and manicured, lifeless lawns. It smelled of new paint and cheap carpet. Mark had arranged for a few pieces of my old furniture to be delivered: my reading chair, my bedside table, a box of clothes. The rest, he informed me, had been put into storage, or sold. He was vague on the details. He and Jessica helped me move in, their movements brisk and efficient, their faces a careful blend of pity and impatience. They wanted this over with. "See, Dad, isn't this nice?" Jessica said, gesturing around the small living room. "Everything is brand new, no drafts, and there's an emergency call button right here." I just nodded, playing the part of a docile, broken man. I let my shoulders slump. I kept my eyes on the floor. I looked defeated. It was a convincing performance, fueled by the genuine pain of my loss. "Thank you," I mumbled. "I'm just tired." They left, promising to check on me in a few days. The moment the door closed, I stood up straight. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. The first thing I needed was the trust document. Laura had been meticulous. She kept all our important papers in a fireproof lockbox in the bottom of my closet. I prayed Mark hadn't found it, or if he had, that he hadn't understood its significance. He had called me later that week to inform me that the bulk of the estate was being liquidated and that the lockbox was with him for safekeeping. My heart had sunk, but I kept my voice steady, asking only if he'd found my old military service medals. He said he had, and he'd set them aside for me. The casualness of his response gave me a sliver of hope. To him, the box was just more old junk belonging to his father, the most important items being any stock certificates or bonds he could easily convert. He wouldn't have bothered reading a thick, boring legal trust document. I needed a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but someone smart, tenacious, and, if possible, someone who understood the kind of quiet, understated warfare I was about to wage. I spent 2 days on the small laptop Mark had left for me, researching estate lawyers in the city. I ignored the big, flashy firms. I was looking for a smaller practice, a specialist. I found him on the third day. David Chen, a solo practitioner with a string of impressive case victories in probate and trust litigation. His website was simple, professional, and had testimonials that spoke of his diligence and compassion. I called his office and made an appointment, giving a vague description of my situation as a dispute over a property sale. The next step was getting the trust documents. I couldn't just ask Mark for them. It would tip him off immediately. I had to be clever. I called him, my voice weak and trembling. "Mark," I began, putting a pathetic quaver into my words. I was looking for my old life insurance policy, the one from the plant. I need to see what the beneficiary details are. I think the paperwork was in that old metal box." It was a plausible request. A man my age, having just faced his own mortality, would naturally be thinking about such things. "Dad, everything is fine," he said, his voice laced with that familiar patronizing tone. "The money from the house sale is more than enough. You don't need to worry about old policies." "Please, Mark," I begged, letting a tearful crack enter my voice. "It's for my peace of mind. Your mother, she always made sure those things were in order. It would make me feel better just to see it." He sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "Fine. I'm busy this week, but I can have Jessica drop the box off at your apartment on Friday. But Dad, I'm holding on to the financial papers. I'm managing your portfolio now. It's for the best." "Of course, son. Thank you," I whispered. I hung up, my hand shaking, but this time with triumph. He was taking the bait. He was so convinced of his own brilliance, so sure of my weakness, that he couldn't see the trap being laid. Jessica arrived that Friday, her expression sour. She handed me the heavy metal box as if it were contaminated. "Here," she said curtly. "Mark says to call him if you need anything. We're heading to the coast for the weekend, celebrating a bit." Celebrating the theft of my life. The callousness of it was breathtaking. I just nodded meekly. "Have a nice time." As soon as her car was out of the parking lot, I was at the box. My hands fumbled with the key. Inside, beneath old passports and my birth certificate, was a thick blue folder. On the label, in Laura's neat, elegant script, were the words, "The Miller Family Revocable Living Trust." I pulled it out, my heart pounding. I spent the rest of the day and most of the night reading it. It was all there, the legal framework of our life's work. The deed of transfer, officially stamped and recorded by the county clerk's office, showing that 214 Elm Street was the property of the trust. My power of attorney document, the one I'd signed, gave Mark authority over assets held in my name, Thomas Miller. It said nothing about the trust. He had no legal right to act as a trustee. The sale was fraudulent. The relief was so profound, it brought me to my knees. I sat on the cheap carpet of that horrible apartment, and I wept. I wept for Laura's love and foresight. I wept for the son I had lost. And I wept with a grim, righteous fury for the battle that was to come. My meeting with David Chen was on a Tuesday morning. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one I had worn to weddings and funerals. I needed to project seriousness and credibility. His office was in a modest but respectable building downtown. It was small, lined with books, and had a large window overlooking the city. David Chen was a man in his late 40s, with a calm, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened patiently as I laid out the story, starting from my surgery and ending with the discovery of the trust document. I spoke quietly, factually, keeping my emotions in check. When I finished, I pushed the blue folder across his desk. He was silent for a long time, his brow furrowed as he read. He examined the trust agreement, the recorded deed of transfer, and a copy of the power of attorney I had managed to get from the rehab center's administrative files. He went back and forth between the documents, his expression growing more and more intense. Finally, he looked up at me. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of humor, but of a predator who has just caught the scent of blood. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice a low hum of excitement, "your son has made a very, very big mistake." He explained the legal position in simple terms. The power of attorney was irrelevant. Mark had acted without the authority of the trust, of which I was the sole surviving trustee. He had, in effect, sold a property that he had no legal right to sell. He had committed fraud. "What he did," David continued, leaning forward, "is the equivalent of selling the Brooklyn Bridge. The sale is void, utterly and completely. The house is still yours. Or rather, it belongs to the trust, and you control the trust." The words were the sweetest music I had ever heard. "So, what do we do?" I asked. We have a few options, David said, his mind clearly racing. We could go in loud, file a lawsuit, get an immediate injunction. It would be messy, public, and tip your son off immediately. Or, he paused, tapping a pen on his desk. We could play this quietly. Let your son and the new owners believe everything is fine. We gather our ammunition. We verify everything. Then we choose our moment to strike. A strategic decapitation. The second one, I said without hesitation. I want him to feel secure. I want him to be standing on top of his mountain of money, feeling like the king of the world, right before I kick it out from under him. David's smile widened. I like your style, Mr. Miller. So, here's the plan. First, I'll do a full title search on the property to confirm the chain of ownership and see exactly what documents your son filed. It will all be a matter of public record. He likely filed a fraudulent affidavit claiming he had the authority to act for the trust. That's a felony. Second, we need to find out where the money went, the proceeds from the sale. He probably put it into an account in his name. That's wire fraud and likely financial elder abuse. He told me he was managing my portfolio, I said, the words tasting like ash. Of course he is, David said with a cynical nod. We'll need to subpoena those bank records eventually. For now, we operate in the shadows. Your job is the hardest part. You must continue to play the part of the broken old man. You are defeated. You have accepted your new life in the apartment. Can you do that? I've been rehearsing, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I'm ready for opening night. The weeks that followed were a strange, surreal exercise in duplicity. I settled into a routine in the apartment. I went for slow, shuffling walks around the complex. I sat on the park benches staring into space. I spoke to Mark on the phone in a monotone, never raising my voice, never complaining. I asked simple questions about my finances, and he gave me vague, reassuring answers about solid growth and good returns. He was investing my money, he said, my money, the proceeds from the gutting of my life. Every few days, I would have a clandestine meeting with David. He worked quickly. He confirmed everything. The title was still clean in the name of the trust. Mark had filed a forged document, a clumsily prepared affidavit full of lies, claiming to be the successor trustee. The arrogance was staggering. He had bet everything on the assumption that I would be too sick, too grieving, or too stupid to ever check. David also discovered the buyers, a young tech couple flush with cash and eager to get into the neighborhood. They had paid top dollar, all cash, closing in less than 2 weeks. They were, in the legal sense, innocent parties. But their dream home was built on a foundation of lies. The money trail is our next target, David explained during one of our meetings. He moved the entire sum, $1,250,000, into a newly opened brokerage account under his name alone. It's a clear case of conversion. He laid out the final phase of the plan. We wouldn't just sue to get the house back. That was a given. We would let Mark dig his own grave a little deeper. We would wait until he felt completely, untouchably safe. Let him spend some of the money, David advised, a glint in his eye. Let him buy a new car. Let him book an expensive vacation. Every dollar he spends makes the criminal case against him stronger. It proves intent. So I waited. I played the part of the ghost in the machine, haunting the beige apartment, while my son and his wife lived lavishly on the fruits of their betrayal. I saw the pictures on Jessica's social media, a new luxury SUV in their driveway, a weekend trip to a 5-star spa, a post about looking at vacation homes in Florida. They were burning through my life, celebrating their victory. The hardest part was the anger. It was a constant, simmering fire in my belly. I would walk the sterile hallways of the apartment complex at night, my fists clenched, my jaw tight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash things, but I channeled it. I channeled all that rage into focus. I would sit with Laura's picture and I would talk to her. Just a little longer, sweetheart, I'd whisper to her smiling face. They think they've won. They've forgotten about you. But we haven't. We're going to get our home back. I promise. The breaking point, the moment I knew it was time to act, came about 2 months after I had moved into the apartment. Mark called me, his voice bursting with excitement. Dad, great news. Jessica and I have found our dream house. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but it has great bones. We're putting in an offer. That's Nice, son, I said, my voice a dull monotone. It's more than nice. It's an investment. And the best part is, with the way your portfolio is performing, we can make a significant down payment in cash. I'll need to liquidate some of your assets, of course, but it's for a good cause, building our family's future. He was going to use the money from the sale of my house to buy his own. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it stole my breath. That was it, the final insult. He wasn't just stealing my past, he was using it to build his future. I hung up the phone and immediately called David. It's time, I said. David was ready. I agree. His greed is our opportunity. He'll need to move a large sum of money for the down payment. That transaction will be the nail in his coffin. Here's what we're going to do. The plan he laid out was beautiful in its simplicity and its cruelty. We wouldn't just send a letter from a lawyer. We would arrange a meeting, a final, formal confrontation on our terms, at a time and place of our choosing. We would create a stage, and on that stage, Mark and Jessica's world would come crashing down. I've already been in contact with the lawyer for the family who bought your house, David said. They've been trying to get the title insurance sorted, and it's been held up. The title company has flagged the irregular transfer. Their lawyer is getting nervous. I told him there was a clerical issue with the estate and that a meeting was required with all parties to resolve it. He agreed immediately. The meeting was set for the following Wednesday at the main branch of the bank that had handled the original transaction. The bank manager would be there, as would the buyers and their lawyer. And of course, Mark and Jessica, who had been told the meeting was a final formality to clear up the title issue so the new buyers could be secure. Mark, confident in his forged documents, saw it as a minor bureaucratic hurdle. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark of the apartment, the blue folder containing the trust documents resting on my lap. It felt warm, alive. It was Laura's last gift to me, a shield, a sword. I thought about the son I had raised, the boy who loved baseball and had a soft spot for stray animals. Where did he go? When did the rot set in? Was it my fault? Did I fail him somehow? The questions haunted me, but I pushed them away. This was no longer about understanding. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the sanctuary that he had tried to steal and desecrate. The next morning, I put on my suit. As I knotted my tie, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was older, his face etched with new lines of grief and stress. But his eyes were clear. The defeated slump was gone. I stood tall. I was not a victim anymore. I was the executor of a promise. I was going to get my home back. David picked me up. He gave me a single approving nod. Ready, Tom? I am, I said, my voice steady. We drove to the bank in silence. The city flashed by outside the window, a blur of concrete and glass. But in my mind, I saw my garden. I saw the sun slanting through the kitchen window. I saw Laura's armchair by the fireplace. I was going home. The bank's conference room was on the top floor, a cavern of glass and steel with a panoramic view of the city. It was designed to make people feel small. When David and I walked in, the others were already there. The young couple, the buyers, sat huddled with their lawyer, looking anxious. The bank manager, a severe-looking woman named Miss Albright, sat at the head of the table, her expression impatient. And then there were Mark and Jessica. They were the picture of confident affluence. Mark was in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. Jessica was wearing a bright red dress, a slash of victory against the room's muted tones. She had a new diamond bracelet on her wrist, one I had never seen before. It glittered under the recessed lighting. My money glittered on her wrist. Mark strode over to me, a look of annoyance on his face. Dad, what are you doing here? I told you I'd handle this. It's just some paperwork nonsense. My lawyer insisted I be present, I said calmly, gesturing to David, who gave a curt nod. Jessica scoffed, a little puff of air. A lawyer? Tom, isn't that a bit dramatic? And a waste of money. Mark has it all under control. Let's just get this over with, Mark said, turning to address the room. I understand there's some kind of snag with the title. I have the documents that prove I had full authority to execute the sale on my father's behalf. He was, as you know, medically incapacitated. He shot me a look that was a mixture of pity and warning. Play along. Ms. Albright, the bank manager, cleared her throat. Mr. Miller, your son presented a durable power of attorney and an affidavit stating he was the acting trustee for your family's estate. However, the title insurance company has flagged a prior deed transfer into a trust that was never properly dissolved. We need to clear this up before the title can be guaranteed. Mark smiled, a smooth, reptilian expression. A misunderstanding, I assure you. An old, defunct trust my parents set up years ago. It was superseded by my father's more recent legal directives. My power of attorney gives me full control. Dad, why don't you tell them? He turned to me, his eyes daring me to contradict him. He was so sure of his power, so sure I was broken. This was the moment, the precipice. I took a slow breath. The room was silent. Everyone was looking at me. I felt David's reassuring presence beside me. I looked at my son, at the stranger in the expensive suit. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room like a stone. Mark's smile faltered. What? Dad, don't be confused. I'm not confused, I said, my voice gaining strength. I'm clearer than I've been in months. No, you did not have my authority. David chose that moment to step forward. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it with a decisive snap. My name is David Chen. I am Thomas Miller's legal counsel, and I'm afraid we are here today not to clear up a clerical error, but to address a significant act of fraud. A collective gasp went through the room. The young couple looked horrified. Ms. Albright's face hardened. Mark's face went pale. What is this? He stammered. Dad, what have you done? What have you done, Mark? I asked, my voice ringing with a cold power I didn't know I had. David didn't wait for an answer. He pulled out a copy of the trust document and slid it across the table to Ms. Albright. This is the Thomas and Laura Miller Revocable Living Trust, established in 2008. As you can see, upon the death of Laura Miller, Thomas Miller became the sole surviving trustee. He then slid a copy of the county recorded deed next to it. And this is the deed of transfer, also from 2008, legally moving the property at 214 Elm Street from the names of Thomas and Laura Miller into the ownership of the trust. That property has not been owned by Thomas Miller personally for over a decade. He let that sink in. The buyer's lawyer was frantically reading the documents, his face growing paler by the second. David continued, his voice calm and lethal. The power of attorney that Mark Miller used to perpetrate the sale only grants him authority over the personal assets of Thomas Miller. It grants him absolutely no authority to act on behalf of or as a trustee for the Miller Family Trust. The affidavit he filed with the county, claiming to be the successor trustee, is a fabrication. It is a fraudulent document. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence fell between us like a slab of granite. Mark stared at the papers, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a man who had just been told the laws of physics no longer applied. This means, David concluded, his voice cutting through the tension, that the sale of 214 Elm Street is, and has always been, null and void. Mark Miller sold a property he had no legal right to touch. The house still belongs to the trust. My client, Mr. Thomas Miller, is still the rightful controller of his home. The dam broke. Jessica was the first to crack. A strangled, hysterical noise escaped her throat. No, that's not possible. Mark, tell them they're wrong. But Mark was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He looked from the documents to my face, and in my eyes, he finally saw not a weak old man, but the architect of his ruin. You, he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. You did this. You set me up. You set yourself up, Mark, I said, my voice even. You were so busy counting the money you never bothered to read the fine print. You were so sure I was finished that you got sloppy. You disrespected me. But worse, you disrespected your mother's memory. You tried to sell her legacy. That was your mistake. The buyer's lawyer slammed his hand on the table. This is a disaster. My clients paid over $1 million. Where is that money? All eyes turned to Mark. David answered for him. The $1,250,000 was wired into a private brokerage account opened by Mr. Mark Miller, an account to which my client has no access. This is also known as theft. Ms. Albright, the bank manager, finally spoke, her voice like cracking ice. "Mr. Miller," she said to Mark, "if what this lawyer says is true, you have used this bank to facilitate a fraudulent transaction. You have committed wire fraud." She picked up her phone. "I'm calling our head of security and our legal department." That's when Mark completely lost control. The mask of sophistication shattered, revealing the panicked, greedy child underneath. He lunged across the table, not at me, but at the papers, as if destroying them could undo what had been done. "Lies! It's all lies!" he screamed, his hands scrabbling for the documents. David, who had clearly anticipated this, stepped calmly in his path. Two uniformed bank security guards entered the room at that exact moment, drawn by Ms. Albright's call. They flanked the door, their presence a solid wall of authority. "Mr. Miller, I suggest you calm down," one of the guards said, his hand resting on his belt. Jessica began to sob, loud, theatrical wails of despair. "Our new house, the money, it's all gone. You've ruined us," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, diamond-clad finger at me. "You ruined yourselves," I said quietly. "You let greed blind you." Mark turned on me then, his face contorted with a primal fury. "I did this for you, to take care of you, you ungrateful old man. That house was a millstone around your neck." "That house was my life," I said, "and you tried to steal it. Not for me, for you, for your cars and your vacations and your new house built with my money. You are a thief, Mark, and a fool." My words hit him harder than any physical blow. He staggered back, his face ashen. The fight went out of him, replaced by the crushing, absolute realization of his defeat. He had lost, completely and irrevocably. The buyers were now shouting at their lawyer, who was shouting at Miss Albright. Jessica was weeping hysterically into her hands, and my son, my only child, just stood there in the middle of the chaos, a statue of broken arrogance. David leaned over to me and whispered, "The district attorney's office is going to have a field day with this. Forgery, wire fraud, financial elder abuse. He's looking at serious prison time." I watched my son's world burn down around him, and I felt nothing. Not joy, not satisfaction, just a profound, aching emptiness. A deep, sorrowful pity for the man he could have been. The security guards escorted a now catatonic Mark and a wailing Jessica from the room. The buyers and their lawyer huddled in a corner, beginning the long, painful process of trying to claw their money back from my son. Ms. Albright was on the phone, speaking in clipped, angry tones. David and I stood up. The battle was over. "It's done, Tom," he said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The house is yours. We'll file the paperwork to formally rescind the sale immediately." I just nodded, unable to speak. We walked out of the conference room, leaving the wreckage behind. As we rode the elevator down in silence, I saw my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked tired. I looked old. But I also looked free. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. The DA pressed charges against Mark. Faced with the mountain of evidence David had prepared, the forged affidavit, the bank records showing the transfer of funds into his personal account, the lavish spending, he had no choice but to plead guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for his cooperation in returning the funds. It wasn't a clean process. He had already spent a significant portion of the money. The new SUV was repossessed. The down payment for his dream house was seized. He and Jessica were forced to sell their condominium to pay back the rest of what he owed the defrauded buyers. They were ruined, financially and socially. Mark was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security prison. 3 years. It felt like a lifetime, and also not nearly enough. A week after the sentencing, I got a call. It was from the prison. I accepted the charges, and his voice came on the line, thin and distant. "Dad?" I was silent. What was there to say? "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, the words sounding hollow, rehearsed. "I messed up. I know that. I want to know if you can forgive me." I thought for a long moment. I thought of my house, my home, standing empty and waiting for me. I thought of Laura and the promise I had kept. I thought of the cold, sterile apartment and the despair that had almost consumed me. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, Mark, I said finally, my voice calm and steady. Right now, all I feel is the consequences of your choices. You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it. Goodbye, son. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I felt a sense of finality, of a door closing on a painful chapter of my life. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about peace. The process of moving back into my house was slow and deliberate. The buyers, thankfully, had not had time to modernize anything. They had been waiting for the title to clear. The house was exactly as I had left it, only dusty and silent. The first thing I did was walk out into the garden. The roses were overgrown, weeds choking the flower beds. But they were alive. They had survived. I spent the entire first day on my hands and knees, pulling weeds, pruning the bushes, feeling the familiar ache in my back and the warm soil under my fingernails. I was tending to my roots. Over the next few months, I brought my home back to life. I polished the floors, aired out the rooms, and put every piece of furniture back in its rightful place. I reclaimed the space, memory by memory. The silence was different now. It was no longer the oppressive quiet of grief, but the peaceful silence of sanctuary. I sit now in my reading chair, the one Mark had relegated to a corner of the beige apartment. A fire crackles in the hearth. Outside, snow is gently falling, blanketing Laura's garden in a layer of pure white. The house is warm and safe. It is mine. It is ours. I learned a hard lesson about the human heart. I learned that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. I learned that family is not always defined by blood, but by respect, love, and integrity. My son failed that test. He chose money over memory, greed over grace. His life is a testament to that poor choice, a landscape of ruin he created himself. My life, however, is not. I am old, yes. I carry the scars of surgery and betrayal, but I am not broken. I am a survivor. I am the guardian of this house, the keeper of its stories. I won my war, not through shouting or violence, but through the quiet strength of a promise made to the woman I loved, and through the foresight she had to protect us even after she was gone. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I still talk to her. "Well, Laura," I say to the empty chair beside me, "we did it. We saved our home." And in the gentle flicker of the firelight, I can almost feel her hand in mine, a silent acknowledgement of a love that proved stronger than greed and a legacy that could not be sold. Justice, I've found, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet and enduring as the foundations of a well-loved home.